So the Battle of Endor is one of the most historically significant battles of the Galactic Civil War, rivaling the Battle of Yavin for the effect it had on the course of the military conflict. It spelled the beginning of the end of the Empire, and really set in motion the events that would lead to the end of the Galactic Civil War, at least on paper. But it was also a major strategic blunder on the part of the Empire, which had everything working in their favor, so I figured today we would take a look at what the Empire could have done differently to have a better outcome at Endor. I'm Colin, and this is Sci-Fi Deep Dive. Remember, if you enjoyed this video, to head down below and hit that subscribe button. So, hindsight's 2020, and we're going to be doing a lot of hindsighting, I guess, in this video, looking back on the Battle of Endor, and discussing exactly what the Empire could have done differently. They had basically everything working in their advantage at Endor. By the time of the Battle of Endor, while the Rebel Alliance had gained a lot of momentum and had picked up a lot of steam, they were still relatively small compared to the might and capability of the Imperial Navy and the Imperial Army. So they vastly outnumbered and outgunned Rebel forces at the Battle of Endor. But the things that really worked in the Empire's favor were intelligence-related. Ultimately, throughout the entirety of the Galactic Civil War, the biggest advantage that the Rebels had was that they could hit Imperial targets when they least expected it, and then withdraw before Imperial forces could really respond. At Endor, that was simply not the case. At Endor, the Empire knew that the Rebels were coming, they knew when they were coming, they knew how big the Rebel fleet was and what ships made up this fleet, they knew a lot of the strategies that were going to be employed by Rebel forces during the engagement, including the deployment of a ground strike team in an effort to take the shield generator. They knew the individuals involved in this engagement, and they had plenty of time to prepare a response, enough time to amass a huge fleet. In any practical conflict, that would have spelled an imminent defeat for the Rebel Alliance at Endor. But some things really did work against the Empire, and they're the same character flaws that the Empire has experienced basically from its founding. A sort of sense of self-security that is undeserved, a sort of ego-based gloating mentality that meant that every victory couldn't just be a victory. It had to be a triumphant victory that played out theatrically. It put the Empire at a huge disadvantage in countless battles, and that really was a prominent factor in the Battle of Endor. So what could the Empire have done differently? So first things first, the first thing the Empire could have done differently at the Battle of Endor was simply pay attention to the Ewoks. If they had noticed the Ewoks as a credible threat from the early days of the Imperial occupation on the Forest Moon, they likely wouldn't have been caught off guard when the Ewoks launched their offensive against Imperial forces, which ultimately tipped the tide of the ground battle, allowing Rebel troops to disable the shield generator protecting the second Death Star. If that shield generator had never been disabled, if Imperial forces had been able to maybe move on the Ewoks at the same time that they moved on the Rebels that were inside of the shield facility, the battle on the ground would have been over before it even began, and the shield would have remained up, the Death Star would have remained safe, and the battle would have inevitably ended in a Rebel defeat. Furthermore, the Imperial fleet was intentionally held back to prevent a Rebel retreat, with the idea of holding the Rebel fleet there long enough to use the super laser of the Death Star against Rebel capital ships. And while that is an impressive display of power, the super laser of the Death Star being used to target an individual capital ship and to target several capital ships in a single battle is a very impressive display of military power, but is also tactically ridiculous. From the beginning of the battle, the Imperial Navy had a massive numerical advantage and a massive firepower advantage over the Rebel ships present in that engagement. If they had moved in sooner, moving to simply eradicate the Rebel fleet before they even got close to the Death Star, yeah, they wouldn't have been able to show off the Death Star's super laser, but they would have dealt a critical blow to the Rebel Alliance. And lastly, and this seems like a given, don't put your major political leaders in a battle space. This isn't the 1700s where you need your political leader at the front of the line to lead the charge. Palpatine should have been back on Coruscant, and Vader really shouldn't have been there either, but his death was, in the grand scheme of things, a little bit inconsequential. Had he died but the Emperor survived, the war would have likely continued. The Emperor's death is what really began the downward spiral for the Empire as a political institution. So keeping Palpatine away from the battlefield is the most practical strategic decision, but his own ego and his drive to need to be there when the Rebel Alliance failed, put him in harm's way and ultimately cost him his life, and began the downward spiral that led to the Empire's collapse. So if he had been kept away from that battle, even if everything else had gone the way it was planned for the Rebels, where they managed to disable the shield generator and then take out the Death Star, it would have been a blow to the Empire, and probably a pretty big propaganda hit, as this would now be the second massive superweapon the Rebels had destroyed, but it wouldn't be the imminent end of the Empire with the death of the Emperor. It wouldn't begin that downward spiral that we see following the Battle of Endor. But all of these problems stem back to the same sort of characteristic that the Empire displays time and time again. They just simply believe themselves to be invincible, and instead of going for practical, functional battlefield victories, they instead prioritize big theatrical displays of force, believing that regardless they'll win, so they might as well win with style, when the very decisions that they made in their own hubris, their own belief of their own invincibility, led to their downfall and their defeat at the Battle of Endor, which, as many of us know, ultimately led to the end of the war. In the immediate aftermath of the Battle of Endor, with the death of the Emperor, the Empire actually began turning on its own people, which is the other thing that really accelerated the Empire's downfall, in something known as Operation Cinder. If you'd like to learn about Operation Cinder, when Imperial forces turned on Imperial loyalist worlds in an effort to sort of basically burn the galaxy to the ground, I'll leave a link up here to my video on that. And I'd like you to let me know whether you think if the Empire had followed the advice I just gave at the Battle of Endor, if they would have won, or do you think it still would have been a Rebel victory? Do you think the Imperial defeat at Endor was inevitable, or do you think it was possible that the Empire could have won that battle? And if you think there's something I missed, also leave that down below in the comments. While you're down there, you can also let me know if there's anything else you want me to cover in Star Wars or anywhere else in science fiction. Last but not least, if you enjoyed this video, head down below, hit the like button, the subscribe button, and the bell icon so you get notified when I upload new videos. So for Sci-Fi Deep Dive, I'm Colin, and I will see you next time.